Welcome our dear participants from all over the country. Our webinar for today is entitled Cisco Live Sessions Introduction to Cybersecurity Chapter 3, Protecting Your Data and Privacy, Batch 2. This webinar is organized by the Digital Learners Project of the ICT Literacy and Competency Development Bureau of the Department of Information and Communications Technology in partnership with Cisco Networking Academy. The Introduction to Cybersecurity course is designed to explore cybersecurity as a potential specialization in an IT career. These course materials will assist participants in developing the skills necessary to do the following. First is to understand the importance of safe online behaviors. Second is describe the different types of malware and attacks. Lastly, describe the protection strategies used by organizations against attacks. The Introduction to Cybersecurity is a 5-chapter online course. We will be focusing on Chapter 3, Protecting Your Data and Privacy today. This webinar is for all our adult project beneficiaries and learners from different schools, SDOs, LGUs, and those who have signed up on our Facebook page. I am Kali Bermio of the Digital Learners Project, and I will be the course officer for today's webinar. To start today's webinar session, may I call on Mr. Paul Alcala of the Digital Learners Project to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Kali, for the introduction. First of all, I'd like to greet everyone a good morning to all our Zoom participants, Facebook page sign-ups, especially our teachers and students who are part of our partner beneficiaries. A pleasant morning to everyone. Despite the weather conditions, I hope everyone is in excellent physical and mental health condition, and I am pleased to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of the ICT Literacy and Competency Development Bureau of the DICT. Thank you very much for making time out of your busy day today to attend our webinar session. As you may be aware, the goals of the ILCDB's Digital Learners Project, or DLP, include achieving the objectives of this webinar. The project goals is to make accessible ICT education training available to students, instructors, non-teaching personnel, and/or government workers nationwide, as well as to provide instruction on cyber-safe practices and cybersecurity awareness. So for this webinar, we hope that you'd be able to learn more about the foundations or the introduction to cybersecurity and how to be safe online. We hope that you learn to think critically online and, of course, be responsible netizens in today's digital age. And I am confident that you will learn a lot with all the knowledge that will be shared with us today by our resource person. Again, on behalf of the ILCDB, we hope that today is going to be another day full of learning for all of you, and good luck. Once again, welcome and have fun learning. Back to you, Kali.
Thank you, Sir Paul, for your encouraging words to all of us here. To learn more about our project, let us all watch this video overview.
Greetings, everyone. Before we start this session, we, the project management team of the DLP, or Digital Learners Project of the ICT Literacy and Competency Development Bureau of the Department of Information and Communications Technology, would like to give a short overview of our project. I am Eileen Parado, Project Development Officer of the ICT ILCDB. To start, the DICT is responsible for planning, development, and promotion of the country's information and communications technology agenda, and it upholds its mandate to develop standards and mechanisms for the protection of children online. Within the DICT is the ICT Literacy and Competency Development Bureau, or ILCDB, that implements ICT literacy programs. With this, the Digital Learners Project was developed to promote digital literacy and cyber education to students and learners. As an overview, the Digital Learners Project is a consolidation of digital education program projects, which includes the digital teachers and learners, the cyber-safe learning for education, and the ICT skilling upskilling projects. The main goal of this project is to promote digital literacy, deliver cyber education, and promote cyber safety and security awareness and practices. These are the specific objectives of the project. First is to promote the use of ICT for the enhancement of key public services. Second is to empower the disadvantaged group of population through ICT. Third is to promote partnership between and among local and international ICT, research and development, educational and training institute. Next is to promote digital literacy to students and learners. Fifth is to deliver cyber education and learning contents. And finally, to map trends and inform policy and future interventions. What we do in the project. There are two major components of the project, the device deployment and the provision of learning contents. For the device deployment, the DICT through the ILCDB deploy devices, laptops and tablets to different LGUs, public schools, and other public learning institutions. This is to provide means to continue with education, learning, as well as knowledge and capacity building of the nation despite the new normal situation. Aside from the deployment, the project also offers ICT courses and related contents to device recipients as well as other interested individuals to increase digital literacy and awareness on cyber threats, cybersecurity, and hygiene, using different platforms developed by partners of the ICT. These online courses were made possible in partnership with different private and public institutions such as University of the Philippines College of Education, Buri Technology Incorporated through CAS LMS, Cisco Networking Academy, Stairway Foundation Incorporated, Digital Tayo from Facebook and Ahad Behavioral Design, Microsoft, and Go Philippines. So that's for a quick introduction on the Digital Learners Project of the DICT ILCDB. If you have any question, feel free to reach us at digitallearning@dict.gov.ph. Thank you.
Now that we know what the Digital Learners Project is all about, we would like to proceed the main event for our webinar session for today. Allow me to introduce our resource person. He is an experienced IT professional who is currently working as a professor at a prestigious university in the Philippines with in-depth knowledge in programming, networking, and the security field. Apart from his full-time job, he conducts seminars and trainings, software projects, network development and maintenance, and consultancy in both network and security aspects. Without further ado, let me introduce our energetic resource person for today, Mr. Gerard Nathaniel.
So welcome to the second batch for the chapter 3, which is protecting your data and privacy online. So why would you need to do cybersecurity in the first place? It's basically just to protect your own data, to protect valuable information that you have placed online on your own or via other platforms, which could be damaging if put into the wrong hands. So to be able to protect your computing devices or any devices that you have that has your data, regardless if that's a cell phone, that's a computer, that's a laptop, that's an IoT device, even if it's mainly a sensor. Most of the things have what we call firewall. So a firewall could be a hardware or a software-based firewall, but in this case, this is talking about the software firewall. So think of it as a traffic enforcer looking at the different things that are going throughout your computing devices. So things like what are specifically it pertains to the different packets that are going in and going out of your devices. So in layman's terms, just think of there is a like a road towards in terms of going in and going out of your device. And these firewalls or this firewall software thing is like a traffic enforcer that looks on the different vehicles, or in this case, the different packets that are trying to go in and trying to go out of the system. So you need always to have it updated, because it only has this list of, let's say, permits and denies, which literally pertains to what are allowed to go in and what are allowed to go out of the system, not only going in but also going out. So effectively, or somewhat, it prevents unauthorized access to your data, which is placed inside your computing devices, assuming that you have it properly updated, it's up to date, it's patched, and it's properly configured. Because even if you do have a proper firewall running, regardless if it's the built-in firewall on the operating system that you're using, or it's a third-party firewall that is pre-installed when you install an antivirus or an anti-spyware system on your system, because if it's not properly configured, then it won't be as much effective. Okay. So the antivirus and anti-spyware are like, think of it as police officers that has this list of things to look out for. So originally, this was created way back then when viruses and malwares were very common. It's very common to detect, so you just need basically to have its signature and you would be able to block them. But now, since malwares or malicious softwares are quickly morphing to a more fluid like operation, so antiviruses and anti-spywares not now only limits its detection mechanism in terms of the signatures, but it also tries to detect based on behaviors of those softwares. So if it deems that a certain action, a certain behavior is not acceptable or is not within the safe boundary of what a normal application would do, then it would tag that as a malware or a spyware or a Trojan or a backdoor, or whatever classification it may be under, based on the rules that are configured with the antivirus or your anti-spyware system. And then it will block that for you, and you could basically override it if you want, if it's your own software, if it's your own systems, and it's being tagged as false positive, then you could still allow it to run on your system. But for most of the time, it's probably safe to leave it blocked, based on the rules that are pre-embedded on the antivirus and anti-spyware. And as with the firewall system, it must be up to date. It must always be updated, because if it's not updated, then it won't have the latest anti-virus signatures. It won't have the latest database banks that it looks upon, not only for the signatures of those viruses or of those malwares or files, but also the different behaviors that are already being updated on the back end of whatever company that you or brand you're using as your antivirus or anti-spyware. But this doesn't mean that if you have a proper firewall, if you have a proper antivirus or anti-spyware, that it basically could protect the whole system itself. Because on the last level, or even the weakest chain on the link, is actually the users, because they are very prompt to phishing attacks. They are easily prompt to social engineering attacks, in which the users themselves make the computing systems vulnerable, because they click on this link, because they entered the user credentials on some form, or they install malicious softwares, unknowingly install, because they torrented the installers or games or some software. So in managing your operating systems, you always must update the security settings and basically the software, the browser that you're using, because this is the top one entry point of malicious softwares, of backdoors, of mostly even worms. This is where it comes from. Originally, this was widely spread out through flash drives, but now because the antivirus, the anti-spyware, even the built-ins, if you update it fully, it will be able to block most of the attempts in trying to breach your system. If you plug in a flash drive or a hard disk or any third-party physical hardware that you're plugging in via USB port. However, for browsers, if you don't update your browser, then it could have vulnerabilities, which is very normal on outdated versions. That's why there's updates. And so you must set up proper security settings, maybe higher if possible. Always update your operating systems and browsers. One particular reason is uh, why we need to do this is because if you go to this website, uh, it's simply exploit-db.com. This is only one of the many systems, many platforms that will tell you about vulnerabilities of different softwares. You could basically search a software here, and if it's not updated, then it would probably have a known vulnerability that's already here that is capable of being exploited by another individual that tends to or wants to do harm towards your system or just wants to mingle around your system probably. Okay, so if you don't keep your systems up to date, try to search it here. If it's in here, let's say if you're still using, hopefully nobody is using here Windows 7. So you can see there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are already well known, that are already published here. This is not to be used as an attack vector, but rather as an information dissemination so that the users, if they see that you're using this certain version, I won't open one, uh, and then you see that, okay, I'm using this Windows Server multi-point system, and then I'm using that specific version as well that is indicated here, that's 100% vulnerable already. So better patch it up, better avoid downloading from untrusted sources, from illegal sources rather, uh, because there's always a cost of getting something free that should not be free. Okay, but nobody will give you a free software that they paid for. They're getting something in return. That's insurance. So always download and install latest software patches and security updates. So you must always protect all of your devices, not only most of them, because you need to do password protection. You need to always encrypt your data whenever it's possible, wherever it's possible, so that let's say you lose your phone. If data is still encrypted, you could probably do a remote wipe if you properly configured it to do so. You could also put encryptions on your flash drives, on your portable hard disk drives. Again, just in the event of you lose that particular hardware, you won't be that much troubled because you would have time to make those data obsolete. You would have this amount of time to change whatever is damaging that is placed in that hard disk. Because even if you encrypt the data, that is just for like one step of the security mechanism that we have. Think of it this way: it's like you have a house, you have this fence, you have this gate, but it doesn't give 100% protection to the house. The burglars could just, jump over it. But at least having that fence around would give you enough time to spot them from entering the house. This is the same thing with uh, in terms of protecting your data. This is like the first step. You encrypt your data. You not only password protect everything that you could, and you don't reuse the passwords for obvious reasons, and you don't use plain passwords such as password or password 1234, but you also encrypt the data that is inside, so that you, in the event of you losing the physical hard disk themselves, or in the event that your database gets dumped, hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody here or anybody at this point. At least you have a certain amount of time to fix it, to be able to do mitigations for so that the data, when it's eventually decrypted by the an authorized user or whatever user that had gotten a hand of your precious data, it will be obsolete. So it won't be as much damaging as having it in clear text. So only store necessary information, because once you store information in any computing device, especially if you post it online, think of it as it's already out there. Think of it as everybody has a copy of that. Okay. And always make sure that when you buy IoT devices, because it's now very cheap to buy IoT. IoTs are Internet of Things devices. In layman's terms, anything you buy, anything you any device that you have that has an operating system, that has a platform, not even an operating system, let's say a service that it's running, and then it's connected to the internet, That's an IoT device. And with that said, if you don't protect those IoT devices, those could be the pivot points or the breaching areas of your network that attackers could use or unauthorized users could use to be able to break into your systems. When we buy IoT devices, the first thing we do is we boot it up, we change the password, and then the next thing should not be setting up proper names, or actually names could be one of the few things that you set up, but instead of just leaving it out there because it's already working, you must do like reconnaissance. You must do information gathering towards the firmware and the softwares and even the services that it's running, so you know when you need to update it, when updates are available, because when they are available, it means that especially for patches, it means they're patching a already well-known vulnerability, and if you don't do that, you get breached. Okay, so be very wary of purchasing and deploying IoT devices. And if you're doing this on an enterprise per se, on a business area, especially on data centers, something like that, wherein information are really, really sensitive, uh, put it on another network. Put it on a network that only has those IoT devices. They have direct connection to the internet. They have connection to a certain device that's doing logging, that's doing information gathering, or let's say remoting capability for those IoT devices, but block all communications from that network to sensitive stuff such as, let's say, accounting department. Okay. So for wireless network safety, your home network could easily be breached, even if you're using like the latest ones, if you don't always change the password. So always change the preset SSID and the default administrative password for your routers. So for the default passwords, I think uh, most people on earth now change that, most if they're technically inclined. If not, if you're not one of them, please do change them immediately, and also change the preset SSID. Now, the reason behind changing the preset SSID is two things. For one thing, knowing the preset SSID, I could Google, or anybody could do a search engine search. Not even it's not even locked into Google. You could go use DuckDuckGo, you could use Bing, you could use Yahoo, you could use any other search engines to be able to reverse engineer and determine the default password, because manuals are posted online. The second thing is with the preset SSID, any individual could also reverse engineer that to be able to obtain what is your specific hardware, what is your specific model, what is your specific what modem are you using. And with those enough knowledge, you could do again search to be able to determine if there's a vulnerability for the firmware, for the hardware itself, for the service that it's running, and from there they could breach your network. And if network is breached, they would be able to communicate with the internal devices. That should not be the point. I mean, that should not be the case. So also, if you could, you disable the SSID broadcast. SSID just means the service set identifier, or in layman's terms, this is the Wi-Fi name, yung pangalan ng Wi-Fi pag kumoconnect ka. And always use WPA2 encryption. If you are still using WEP, it is as if you just put it on open, because it takes less than 5 minutes to break any password that is using WEP encryption. And the reason behind that is for two things. One thing is it's really, really old. The second thing is part of the password is actually placed on the wireless on the packets themselves, so when they transmit. And since it's wireless, anybody with a proper receiver would be able to get all of those things, relatively easy, even with free software. So be wary of WPA2 security flaw, which is cracked. This allows the intruder to be able to break the encryption between the wireless router and the clients. Yes, even if you're using WPA2, even if you're using AES encryption, you could still be vulnerable. So what is the go around? Change the password uh, like from time to time. A good measure is at least 4 times a year you change your password, and make sure to be able to view and monitor even if you don't monitor for like 24 hours a day, because probably nobody does that, or only a very selected few individual does that for their home networks. But for Most they just leave it be. But to be able to know if someone already break in is just to look at the list of connected clients, because not all intruders would go to the hustle of changing their MAC addresses to match the MAC address of your device just to connect to your network. That's also one way of doing protection on your wireless network, or just another security hurdle for unauthorized individuals. Do white filtering. When we say whitelist filtering, rather, you only allow certain MAC addresses to connect to your network, regardless if they know the username, if regardless if they know the SSID, which could relatively be easily be taken. Even if you disable SSID broadcast, this is only like 99% effective if no device is connected to the network. Because at that point, nobody is sending the actual SSID information. But if at least one device is connected to a network that has, even if its SSID broadcast is disabled, another individual with relatively nice tools would be able to, or by now normal tools rather, would be able to get that information and use that to connect to the network. Of course, they still need the password, but using again this crack WPA2 security flaw, they could still breach your network. So just again, the go around is to change your password and to use really long, at least for me a good measure is around 16 characters in password length. Okay, so a very strong password phrase. So be very wary of using public Wi-Fi's, because this is not only being used by establishment to get customers. Let's say if you have a coffee shop, you want more clients to do dine-ins because it's now allowed. We're very flexible right now. So to let them do meetings on your place, on your establishment, you give Wi-Fi. But this also gives bad individuals the chance of running their own rogue network or rogue Wi-Fi or evil twin, something like that, that they basically set up the same settings as your SSID, and then they they're going to like uh they're going to poison your network. It's basically getting all of your available IP addresses from your DHCP server, and then they're going to run their own network, in which when the client connects, they're going to connect to their network instead of the original network or the legitimate. So if you're going to do any transaction that deals with money, if you're going to do any transactions that you have to log in to platforms that needed to be accessed on secure networks, just don't use public Wi-Fi's. And if you have no choice, then at least use a VPN tunnel or any VPN software that is paid. To take note, it has to be paid for it to have that at least minimum level of security. Okay, and always turn off Bluetooth when you have to use. Because if you don't turn it off, our Bluetooth devices are very noisy, in the sense that they broadcast stuff out publicly. This is the reason why when you, let's say you have a wireless Bluetooth speaker, you sync it with your phone. Then after you have used it, you turn off the speaker, you turn off your Bluetooth on your phone, your basically your transmitter and receiver. Then the next day you're going to use it again. When you open your Bluetooth on your phone, it automatically connects to that speaker. So the reason behind that is because again, the receivers and transmitters of our Bluetooth devices are very, very noisy. They're trying to uh, search for devices that they're already paired with, and they're trying to connect to those devices. So another individual could relatively use a, again, free software, relatively cheap wireless transmitter receiver, or even just a receiver at this point, to be able to gather those data and then set up a service with the corresponding correct configurations, correct attributes for the service that it's trying to connect to, and then let your device connect. And if you're not looking at your phone, you won't even notice that, oh, it's already connected to that device. And if you let your device connect to another device that is only spoofing or looking like a Bluetooth speaker, but it's not really a Bluetooth speaker. It's a device that is doing something else on the back end. Then the attacker could potentially get almost all, if not all, of your data out of your device without even you knowing it, just because you left the Bluetooth open. Okay, so if you're not using it, it not only conserves your battery, it also protects your data. Just turn it off. The same thing goes with Wi-Fi. If you're not using it, just turn it off. So for passwords, these are not no-brainers, but I think typical. So to prevent criminals from accessing your accounts, use different passwords. And if you can't remember all of the different passwords per account, per service, you could just use a password manager for that. But be very careful of choosing the right password manager, because if you use the wrong one, then all of your passwords could just be given away. So tips for choosing a use password, a good password rather. So obviously do not use passwords or names or in any language that is in dictionaries. Do not use common misspelling of dictionary words, such as removing I, removing S, like removing double S, something like that, replacing it with a single character. Okay. Do not use computer names or account names if possible. And it's saying if possible, use special characters. And it says if possible because not all systems allow the use of special characters. So hopefully in the near future, all systems would allow this, because it increases the complexity in terms of if you try to brute force an account. Okay. And use a password with at least 10 or more characters. So this is something, this is okay at the level of passwords. This is something better. This is good because it is now mixed with alphanumeric characters. And passwords needed to be case sensitive on all platforms, but on some platforms it's not case sensitive. And this is better. So in terms of using systems, if you notice that the system stores the passwords or allows the passwords to be typed uh, in a manner that it's not case sensitive. So it allows you to log in if you type your passwords in all caps, if you type your passwords, regardless if it's you have typed it in all caps or all small letters or small caps. If you can, do not use that system anymore, because that means the system is storing your passwords in clear text or in a manner that it's not case sensitive. That's like one red flag, as they say, on using different systems. So use passphrases rather than a password, because when we say password, it's just one word. If you say phrase, it's multiple words merge into. So always choose something meaningful to you. This is just to ease the remembering of the passwords. Because if you have a ton of, if you have, let's say, 20 platforms and you want to be more safe online, then you have to have at least 20 different passwords, and you don't reuse it. And it has to be phrases. So it has to have meaning to you, but it's not too obvious to the public. Okay, so only you would need it. So add special characters such as this ones. The longer the password, the better. But do take note that do not have it arbitrarily long. Let's say 64 characters, because if you mistype, you will have to re-enter. And for some systems, they only allow you like maybe 3 attempts for good practice in 5 minutes. So if you missed 3 attempts because your password was too long, even for you, then you won't be able to. You effectively blocked yourself from accessing the system. Okay, so avoid common or famous statements, lyrics of popular songs, popular phrases, anything that has anything that is relatively easy to guess, relatively easy to know. Don't use them. Just use random words that you form as a phrase that has meaning to you, that has no meaning to anybody or any other system. That's how you measure a good password, and then you jumble it up. So this is just a summary for new NIST guidelines. This is the National Institute for Science and Technology. So at least 8 characters in length, but not more than 64 characters, because again, prevents you effectively block yourself if you mistype. So no common easily guessed passwords such as ABC123. No composition rules such as having to include lowercase, uppercase, letters and numbers. So make sure it's jumbled up to a point that it only makes sense to you. Only you would remember and would be able to generate that password phrase. So no knowledge-based authentication, such as information from shared secret, marketing, shared secret questions, marketing data, transaction history, uh, basically anything that another individual could think of about you. Your birthday, your birthplace, your parents, last name, your like dog, your the name of your dog, uh, anything that is anything that another individual would be able to know about you. Don't use that as the password. So improve typing accuracy by allowing the user to see the password while typing. This is during setup, but during login, obviously don't. All printing characters and spaces are allowed. If you see a system that allows spaces to be entered or spaces as a special character to be part of the password, that's like a green flag for a good system. So don't use password hints, not unless you really need it. And if at that level you need that, just use a password manager. So no periodical or arbitrary password expiration. So it must have if it must have expiration, just make sure to remember that expiration. Because if you need to change the password every 30 days and you have to type the last password, the last known password before changing it and you can't reuse it, then it will be very hard for an individual to remember it. Not unless, again, you're using a password manager. So again, always encrypt your data where you put it. Place a password, obviously, for decryption, and do not share that password. Also, while you encrypt your data, make sure that you don't put it elsewhere. Because for typical individuals, they have backups that is encrypted, but their primary drives aren't encrypted. So when the primary drive, the operating system gets breached, data will be retrieved or stolen from the primary drive, which is not encrypted. So you have to have encryption on that part. Always back up your data. You don't know when you're going to lose them. You don't know how secure that's going to be left out, and you don't know if how long uh, how long that will remain safe. So if you if you have this very important piece of information, if you have this very important, let's say the payroll, if you're in the accounting department, then you always must have a backup and make sure that backup is safe. Because if the backup gets stolen, then there goes your security measure. Okay. So always to prevent the loss of irreplaceable data, just do backups. If a ransomware hits your system, if you have a backup, you don't need to pay them. Just format, just clean, wipe out everything, and restore data from the backup. So you still lose a bit of data, but it's nothing compared to losing all of it and having to pay without the assurance, without the guarantee of getting it back. So you could do local backups on NAS, external storage hard drives, burning it on CD, DVDs. Not sure if anybody's still doing those things. Backups on thumb drives or flash drives. Not really that good measure because it has a shorter lifespan, or burning it on tapes. You must make sure that you have total control and be responsible for the cost and maintenance of those local backup drives. You could also use online storage backups, such as AWS. They have this cloud storage service, and you need to have a certain access level to be able to back up your files and everything, and make sure that that account is very secure. Because if another individual gets a hold of that account, then essentially you give them the data for free. Okay. So you may be more selective about the data being backed up if you're using cloud storage, because there's a certain fee for a certain limit of hard disk space, as compared to backing it up on locally. So in deleting your files, there's a wrong connotation of if you delete your files that, let's say you have a certain file on your computer, on your computing system, then you delete it. It doesn't mean that it's gone. It's actually still lingering on your hard disk. So to permanently delete them, you must use wiping software, so such as sdelete or secure empty trash. These are the links to be able to delete them. So if you store them online, also make sure that you delete online versions of them if you don't need them anymore, or if they pose a threat to the company per se. So just make sure that when you delete stuff, you permanently wipe the data. Because if not, another individual could use, these are two examples of file recovery software that they could use to be able to recover those files. So if you're new to this stuff, get a flash drive, create a file. After that, delete it, then download one of these two softwares, install it, and then run it on that flash drive. You will be surprised to see that you would be able to recover like a ton of older files that was previously written on the device, written on the hard disk, on the hard disk or on the flash disk themselves, and you would be able to get it. Okay, so if you lose the flash drive, think of it as someone else already gotten that file. That's why even for flash drives, we also encrypt them. So next is safeguarding your online privacy. So always use, whenever possible, two-factor authentication or even multi-factor authentication. So you only not need a username and password. You need something like a physical object, like a credit card for your ATM or your phone or a fob. Or you could also use biometric scans, such as fingerprint, palm print, facial recognition, voice recognition, any of the stuffs out there, or even multi-factor authentications with Google. So it sends you a code. Then you have to type it in before you authenticate on the platform. Do not use or avoid using uh, what do they call it? The SIM card authentication, the multi-factor authentication, wherein it sends the code via SMS, because that's relatively easy to bypass and that's relatively easy to spoof. Okay. So we also have, for a stronger way of doing authentication, zero auth authentication 2.0. This basically is a third party or a middleman that decides whether to allow a certain individual with the credentials that they have sent to access the platform or not. It's actually, think of it as a security guard sitting outside your building that's filtering anyone from going in and going out. Actually, only going in, only one way. So instead of storing all of the user access credentials on the system itself, those are placed on the OAuth authentication servers. And whenever someone is trying to access your system, it's going to be verified first, authenticated first by the OAuth or OAuth servers. And once it's authenticated, it's going to issue a token to the servers themselves to be able to give access to the users that's trying to go in the first place. This makes it this makes the server not only less load because it doesn't deal with the authentication end, but this also makes sure that if just in case, hopefully it doesn't happen, that the server or the system gets breached, it doesn't have the user credentials. They might take data out from it, but they won't be getting the whole user database out of the system because it's not even in the platform itself. It's sitting on another area. So basic principle of making something safe is keep it to yourself. Do not post it anywhere. Do not place it online. Do not put it on the paper. So do not share too much on social media. So sharing as little as much as possible is the better way of doing it. So do not even put, if you could, do not place your birthdays, your email addresses for your the different platforms that you're using, The better way of doing things is like you have an email for only personal use, not much damage if it gets breached. You have another email for, let's say, work purposes. You have another email for certifications if you're in the IT area. You have another email just to access certain platforms. And so it's like a password. If one gets breached, it won't damage the whole thing. They won't get the whole piece of the pie. They only get that one part. And you would be able to easily replace that because that's only one email. That's only one account. So always check your social media settings for uh, things that allow the platform to get and post and give out to their to their partners, to their investors to be able to do targeted advertisements because sometimes the data gets leaked in that area. And for emails and web browser privacy, so email, think of email as a postcard. Copies of the email can be read by anyone with the proper access, especially if it's forwarded to that certain individual. So email is passed among different servers. And during that passing of into different servers, it could be read, it could be copied, it could even be spoofed, it could be manipulated and then resent to the targeted individual. So always use private browsing mode to be able to prevent gathering or actually not gathering but storing of those locally cached information such as your cookies, your sessions on that computing device. If you're not using your PC, you're going to open your email, at least use private browsing mode, okay, for the browser. So private mode are available on all a popular web browser such as Microsoft Internet Explorer. This is already discontinued. We have now Microsoft Edge. It's also Chromium based. So basically Google Chrome that is masked with Microsoft. So we have Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Safari. Uh, this is just to clarify that if you use private mode, it doesn't mean that you're really private. It doesn't mean that it's safe. It just means that by the time you close the tab or by the time you close the browser, the instance of that private mode, it would delete all of the web cookies, web cache, browser sessions, browsing history, even the list of whatever services that you opened. It's going to do that. But that doesn't prevent the ISPs from knowing what you did. That doesn't prevent the admins of the network that you're using from knowing what you access, what was performed, and what data was being transacted. Not unless you use a well-known, a really good VPN, because that encrypts your actual network communications from going in and going out of the computing system that you're using. Okay. So that will be it on my end. If you have any questions, just put them on the chat box and hope everybody got something out of that.
Thank you so much, Sir Gerard, for the informative lecture about securing our personal data. About our in the third lecture, course, protecting your to about certificates. We will issue certificates of participation to those who have attended both webinars, chapter 1 and 3, for the introduction to the cybersecurity series, and who have answered both post-webinar evaluations. On the other hand, certificates of completion are available online if you have enrolled and accomplished the asynchronous materials in the Cisco Networking Academy platform. You may also check our Facebook page for a more detailed explanation of how to avail of the certificates from this webinar series. All right, now for the question and answer portion, feel free to type in your comments in the chat box or click the raise hand button so that you can ask your questions to our resource speaker. May I call on Ms. Eileen Parado from the Digital Learners Project to facilitate the forum.
Yes, hello everyone. Do you have any questions? you may type in the chat box sa Zoom, or for those who are viewing us in Facebook, you may type in the comment section. Sir Gerard, we have one question from Facebook Live po. From Sir Mark Montesines. Yung question niya, sir, is what about job applicants who are required to provide their personal information in an application form?
Okay. So parang may similar question din like I think last week. So for things like job applications, or obviously if you're applying for a job, it's going to ask not only certain things but like a ton of things about you. So just be very wary of the platforms that you're using. If it's telling you to input the data on well-known platforms, it's probably safe. Let's say Google Sheet, yan. It's probably fine. But do take note that if that file or if that Google Sheet gets leaks out, or if improper configurations were made to that Google Sheet, then it's like out there. Have like, let's say have like a phone number for personal things, and then have a phone number for work related area. So even if your work related phone number gets spammed with like job offers or like literally just spam or phishing, it's fine as long as they don't get your personal number. Same thing with email, same thing with like different information. Obviously you can't lie on your job resume. You can't lie on the, let's say, the form that the employer tries to told you to enter your specific details, and they're going to keep it relatively safe. They have this agreement.
Thank you po, Sir Gerard. Another question po from Zoom naman po. Is it safe to save your passwords in a password-protected file like Excel? And any password manager you can recommend daw po, sir?
Okay, so for storing passwords, the top one ideal is just store it in your brain. Don't even put it on your phone. Don't put it on any file. Don't put it anywhere. Because as of now, I think nobody is capable of reading from your brain. Hopefully, in the near future, maybe that's a different case. But for storing passwords on, let's say, files that you are going to do password protection, okay. So there was a, if you have been using Microsoft Excel for quite some time now, at least maybe maybe 8 years by now, there was a previous version wherein when you save Excel, it's not going to be XLSM or XLSX, I think. The newer version. If you're still using the old one, the XLS with those file extension, if even if you password protect that file, it's easily breakable. So while technology improves, it also the technology improves in two ways. The encryption mechanism improves, the breaking of those encryptions improves. If you store passwords on a file that is now safe because of the encryption mechanism that you used or the encryption software that you use, that might not be the case maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now. But if you're changing the passwords anyway, let's say every 4 months or so, then it's relatively safe, depending on where you store the file and depending on the encryption. As for the password manager, I can't particularly recommend any specific brand of password manager. Just use one that's really like top 10 if you use Google, because I myself, I don't use one. I store I try to remember all of my passwords just on my head, and change it every now and then. Don't reuse it. Only use one password per application, per platform.
Alright, another question, sir. Safe daw po bang gamitin ang incognito pag magla-login sa ibang device?
Okay, so when we say safe, if you say incognito, that's the same thing as private kasi incognito sa ano yan, Google Chrome yan. So it's safe in the point that, or in the area that when you close it, it's going to forget everything you did. Okay? Except for the downloaded files. If you download something in incognito, even if you close the incognito browser or the session, it's still going to remain on that device. But in terms of forgetting the cookies, the session, the browsing history, things like that, it's relatively safe. But is it safe to use incognito to log into my bank account that I'm connected to a public Wi-Fi? Definitely no. It's only good for deleting your background history on the local computing system that you're using.
Alright, sir. Yung Windows Defender naman daw, sir, is it enough po ba?
Okay, so I can't say anything bad about any software. That's just bad practice. But okay, think of it this way. Regardless of the antivirus that you're using, it will still depend on the user to be able to make it as safe as it could. Okay? As safe as it could. Again, think of it this way. You have your room, you have a door, you have a lock, right? So are the things in my room safe? Relatively safe. If someone uses a bulldozer to knock my door down, then it's not safe. But if I always lock the door whenever I go out, then it's somewhat relatively safe. As long as it doesn't get mown down by something that is stronger than it. So for antiviruses, anti-spyware, protection software, even IPS, IDS, assuming that you are doing patching and updating always, assuming that you have properly placed it on the right area in your network, on the right uh, access credentials on your platform, and you have properly configured it, it's relatively safe. Any antivirus software or anti-spyware or security protection software are relatively okay. Don't use pirated ones. If you use pirated ones, then that's like a giveaway for anybody to like attack and breach your system. Relatively easy also.
Okay, sir, before we proceed dun sa ibang questions na nandito sa Zoom, meron po munang private message. Ang question po niya is two-factor authentication safe to protect your account for online banking to avoid being hacked?
Okay, for two-factor authentication, it depends on the type of two-factor authentication. If you're using SMS for verification, text, simple messaging system, yung tinetext ka lang ng code, it's not that safe. And I could say it's not that safe because even I could break it. And this is the mindset. If it's easily breakable, if you know how to use search engines, it's not that safe. But if you're using it properly, okay, if you register a phone number that is not known by anyone, only known by you and the platform, then how can someone spoof your number if they don't even know your number in the first place? So again, using that is relatively safe. Just depends on the person and the method of usage. If you're using like key fobs or let's say physical yung physical flash drives, yung may digital number na nag-change every like 60 seconds or so, that's also relatively safe. And I'm saying relatively because if you lose that key fob, you essentially give out your access.
So ayun, thank you po, sir. Another question, what do you think is the best encryption algorithm?
I think there won't ever be a best encryption algorithm because it's a case-to-case scenario. If you want to make, let's say, in terms of encryption, if you want to make data more secure, you're going to hash it, you're going to encrypt it on a bigger key, encryption key. If you have a bigger encryption key, it's going to take a longer time to decrypt it. So let's say if you have this data that's going to be encrypted for, let's say if you have the data, you're going to encrypt it with a really, really high encryption key, encryption bit, and it takes like 5 seconds to encrypt the data. It's going to take maybe 7 seconds approximately to decrypt that data. And if you have too high of an encryption, then the usability goes down. And if the usability goes down, it's not ideal anymore. So there is no such thing as, let's say, best encryption algorithm. There's only enough level of encryption to which data, to which that when the password or the key gets out or inevitably gets obtained by another individual that should not have access to that data, it will be obsolete because you could just change it. So just with enough level of encryption.
Okay, sir, here's a question po, pero may story po yung question niya. Way back when I was in senior high school, sir, sabi niya, DepEd provided a tablet that they can use to access modules. But suddenly, some students from different schools daw send DM saying that yung account niya was logged into their tablet. Until now, sir, I am still confused. Do you have explanation po on how did that happen?
Okay, so since we only have like this brief history, a very generic history, a few things could have happened. This is just my assumption. One, the student unknowingly gave out the access credentials. So when we say unknowingly gave out, the student was attacked using phishing. It was fooled into thinking that it's logging in on the correct platform, even if it's not. The second is they installed a software that had a backdoor in it, a Trojan horse, and using that they got the user credentials. Because I don't think DepEd would bother with students' accounts. They're that side of the government is there to create to give students more information, to give like literally to have a better quality student for the Philippines. So they won't bother with your with the students' data. And if you have received this warning, let's say for Gmail accounts, when you log into a new device, it's going to warn you and send you an email. But the attacker will also see that if they successfully log in. So just immediately change the password and then click the notification or the icon or the link that says I'm not that individual. So the platform will block that device from logging in your account, even if they have your password, even if they have everything they need to log in. The platform will literally block that device from ever being to log in your account on that platform.
Sir, another question po, pagsamahin ko yung two questions. When you're out in public, ano pong mas safe, yung data ba or public Wi-Fi? And then, what's the difference between paid and free antivirus daw po?
Okay, so for one thing, dun sa public Wi-Fi and data, I would always prefer data. Because at least in data, I know only the ISP are copying my data, which they would not care about it. If I connect to the public Wi-Fi, it might be another individual's public Wi-Fi and they could be using my data for something else. For the paid and free antivirus, it's the same thing with all other services. What is the difference between paid and free? Paid is only giving you a limited set of features that it's offering to nudge you to buy the paid version, because the paid version is the more loaded one. It has more features, has more modules. It would be able to basically protect your system a lot better than compared to the free one.
Okay, sir. Regarding po ulit sa authentication or two-factor authentication, Is yung physical security key a good option for two-factor authentication?
Yes, definitely. If you're able to use a key fob for logging in any platform, just don't use that single key fob for all platforms. That's also a bad way of doing it. It's a really good way of protecting your login credentials, or at least another, it prevents another one from logging in automatically or easily to your account. Just don't lose the key fob.
Okay, sir. Which is more secure daw po, SSL or HTTPS?
I think we can't compare them because they're two different things. It's HTTPS is a protocol used on the web platform to deliver web applications or web pages securely, and it's using SSL to do that. If you remove SSL from HTTPS, it won't be able to do its job. But if you use only SSL, you could use it on other platforms because SSL is just secure socket layer. Hindi siya comparable with each other, though HTTPS uses SSL.
Okay, sir. Is there an available AI system specifically for cybersecurity?
There are a lot. There are a lot of companies that has trained and developed models, not really AI, but like think of it as a software that it was created like how a human brain functions. So how does anyone learn? Repeated task, right? Repeated, this is how you properly eat, this is how you properly read, this is how you speak, this is how you pronounce. It is done that way. So a lot of IT companies have developed their own AI models, or literally just a layered model, and then it's going to be deployed as like an IPS IDS type of thing, and it's going to classify if the traffic and if the behavior pattern of your network is normal, it is deemed normal, or it could deem it as abnormal, or which will automatically be tagged as warning, and then it's going to send it to a dashboard. It's not going to fully protect your network, but it's a step in that direction. But again, can't
Thank you, sir.
advertise.
Mhm. Ang dami pa nilang interesting questions, sir. Itong isa. Is it safe to log in while using VPN or proxy?
Okay, two different things. If you use VPN, it means you're using a tunnel. Think of it this way. If I open an account, let's say if I log in my Gmail account right now, it's going to go directly to Google if I use my Gmail. If I use VPN, it doesn't go directly. It's going to use a tunneling technology. That's why it's called VPN, Virtual Private Network. And then it's going to encrypt that data and before it goes out. So it's going to go inside that network. Difference is the ISP won't be able to read that data if I use VPN. It's going to look as if I'm just talking with my VPN server. If I use proxy, it's something like a VPN, but it's not really a VPN. It's usually used by individuals who want to access certain things on the web that is being blocked by the company or being blocked by certain policies. So let's say if you're in your work area, you would like to access, let's say, Facebook, and the firewall blocks direct communication with Facebook. I'm going to connect to a proxy server that's going to talk to the Facebook server in logging in my data and doing whatever I want to do with it. So it's not safe to use proxy to log in to any credentials with any credentials that could be used as damaging to you. It's somewhat safe to use VPN depending on the type of VPN you're using, and if it's free or paid, and obviously the VPN itself, because the ISP won't be able to read off or to understand the packet that is encrypted by the VPN, but the providers of that VPN would be able to. So it's just a matter of, do I trust the proxy more or the VPN provider more? Personally, I'll go with the VPN because they are required to not read data off me even if they are capable of doing that. And I'm paying for that service. That's why it's paid.
Sir, thank you po. Another question, what are your recommendations for someone who wants to pursue a career in cybersecurity? Where do we start?
Start with anything that is ICT and that you are into. Because when you want to go to cybersecurity, you must have at least very good fundamentals of programming and networking. Security is about protecting those two things. So if you can't directly jump to security because you won't be able to understand on a deeper level how that application actually works, how is it built, how do you circumnavigate things that uh, is easily missed during production, during development type of stuff. So learn basic programming at least till like average level. Any programming language will do for as long as it's deployable within the platform that you want to learn how to protect, and then do a bit of networking, maybe basic, maybe a bit advanced, and then from there, before you dive into cybersecurity, there's like a ton of courses out there. I think the ICT even has their own platform that individuals could just register and take courses.
Another question, sir. Does Philippines use AI-based cybersecurity system? And then another interesting question dito, sir. How do you think ordinary people can practice the CIA triad principles?
Okay, so for the Philippines use AI, I can't comment on that. I have like uh, basically can't comment on that. You would have to be affiliated with the government that does that area to be able to know the internal things on how they filter and do stuff, because the government doesn't own the ISPs, and the ISPs control the traffic. Okay. On the other end, the CIA triad, that's relatively easy. You could just download the document and you read it and then you practice it. It's the CIA triad is more of an attitude towards how you govern on how you use platforms, how you protect your data, what are like a do's and don'ts towards using different platforms, and that type of thing. So anybody could practice it. You could just search it in Google and then download the manual.
Okay, sir. Another question po. Should I change my phone SIM once I receive spam messages with my personal details such as name on it?
Okay. You don't necessarily need to change your phone number if you receive spam, because if that's the case, I would be changing my number like every day. Okay. The best thing we could do is you have a separate phone number for banking if you're using your phone for banking purposes, and make sure that number doesn't receive spam. If that number receives spam on, let's say, a daily basis, then maybe change that number. But for the normal number that we're using, no, spam is like already integrated in our daily lives to the point that you should be very knowledgeable in detecting if it's legitimate or if it's just spam, and you could just mark it as spam. Your phone will block it for you.
All right. There are also questions sa chat box po about certificates on this webinar. We posted po sa aming official Facebook page yung frequently asked questions regarding this course, and you may visit our official Facebook page for more details about it. Again, thank you, Sir Gerard, for answering questions. One more question, sir. May pahabol po. How do new SIM cards or phone numbers receive spam even though they have been used online?
Okay. So I think the easiest explanation is if you have in colleges they taught this subject, or in a few high schools, and like eons ago. There's thing we called probability and kalimutan ko yung subject sa math yun eh. But basically, phone numbers are 11 digits, right? So there's a limit. And the combination and the permutation for those numbers could be brute force. So if you have a software that could send messages, it could just iterate through from all zeros to all nines for those numbers to send out the spam. And so they don't really need to know your specific number. They could just have brute forced it. Isa-isa, plus one ng plus one. And so you receive the spam message even if they don't know anything about you. Especially if the spam message doesn't include your name, your address, your birthday, anything about you. It's just spam.
All right. Once again, you may check our official Facebook page po for questions regarding certificates with this course. Thank you again, Sir Gerard. And back to you po, Miss Kali.
Thank you, Ms. Eileen, for facilitating our forum this morning. Moving forward with our program today, we would like to give recognition to our resource person for this webinar series. Allow me to read the Certificate of Appreciation. This Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Gerard Nathaniel Singo in grateful recognition for the webinar Introduction to Cybersecurity, Chapter 1, The Need for Cybersecurity, and Chapter 3, Protecting Your Data and Privacy, held last August 24 and 31, 2022. Signed, Maria Lourdes P. Achilizan, Director 3, ICT, Literacy and Competency Development Bureau.
Good morning again. Good day to everyone. I hope you are all well at hindi pa umuulan dyan sa inyo. Nevertheless, we would like to thank you our wonderful participants who are joining us today in Zoom and those who are watching us on Facebook. It is also with great pleasure that we have our very energetic trainer, Mr. Gerard, and would like to extend our gratitude to our partners, Cisco Networking Academy. I hope everyone Cisco live session, protecting your data. I believe, as I have observed, that you understand the discussion, so I can conclude that the purpose of this session has been completely accomplished. We hope that what you have learned from this session will help you a lot in the future and be able to apply it on a daily basis. I also hope all of you, our dear beneficiaries and participants, can integrate these insights and learnings into their own lives. Again, on behalf of the Digital Learners Project, thank you for attending today's synchronous session and mag-iingat po tayong lahat.